Hello and welcome to the shed. In today's video I wanted to talk about tool maintenance, or maintenance of in particular hand planes or any metal bodied or metal tools. Hope you enjoy. I think it's pretty common knowledge that moisture is the main enemy of metal hand tools when it comes to rust. Now, moisture can cause problems on your metal hand tools in a number of ways. Just the general moisture in the air and humidity, that can cause issues for rust. And then you also have, through the condensation of that moisture, and that can form water droplets when you get really cold and then higher temperatures, so you've got a wide temperature range, you can get condensation. Now, they're not the only things that can cause problems. Along with that moisture, you have dust as a major problem as well. If dust is left on your tools, that can absorb the moisture and hold that moisture against the surface of your tools, causing rust as well. So now I'm going to jump in and tell you about an incident that I had happen in my own workshop a few weeks ago. A couple of weeks ago, the temperature got down quite low overnight. Not that cold, only 0.9 degrees, and then it got up to about 20 degrees the next day. And as my shop is uninsulated, I ended up with moisture pooling up on here, and after the fact I realized that it had been up on my hand planes as well. So this video is kind of me wanting to show you how you can protect your hand planes from that. Obviously, regularly checking them and wiping them down is a good way to achieve this. However, I just want to show you what's happened to some of my hand planes up here, because I haven't done any maintenance on them in a little while. I kind of just forgot about it, and I think everyone kind of pushes maintenance of hand tools to the wayside. And if you've gone to all the effort to clear the rust off all your tools, I just believe that you don't really want them to rust again, or at least you want to help prevent that rust, so any rust that does form on them you can remediate really quickly. So this one is a restored number 3, and there's not a lot of noticeable effect up here on the top. You can't really see anything on the lever cap, but around on the body, and this is where it tends to occur the most, is on the cast iron of these hand planes. If we look at this, we can see there's just a very light tarnishing here. Now, that is actually from moisture landing on the hand plane, and it has formed a very minor bit of rust. Now, the reason behind this, I believe, is this was the most recent one I restored, so the protection that I put on here to stop it rusting was actually more effective, and only a little bit of tarnishing occurred rather than rust. Next, I got my hand plane here from 1864, obviously pre-lateral. Planning to do a video on restoring the other one that I've got up here that's identical to this, so stay tuned for that video. I'll leave that link here when it's done. And we can see that up on the main body of it, not too much problem here, but on the side here we can see that moisture has stayed on here for long enough to cause rust. Now, it's only very surface rust. You can see as I move it with my finger that it's actually coming off on my finger, so it's not going to be a huge issue to fix that up. But obviously it's going to be better if we can prevent that in the first place, so that's what I'm endeavouring to do here, and I'll show you what to do, which is fairly effective as long as you do this method that I'm going to be showing you regularly. And then I've got my number 6. It's been sitting up the top because I don't use it a lot, so it's actually picked up some dust from being in the shop, and we can see we've had quite a bit of moisture land here. It's probably only a few drops of water here, but it's sat here because it's been a little dusty. I've been a little negligent with the looking after this hand plane because I don't use it a lot, and it's up the top there and I don't think about it, and I don't really think it's an issue. So the worst of it is really just on the lever cap here. This one's not been one that I have restored, but it wasn't rusty like this. It had been just derusted, but I didn't get around to restoring this one yet. As you can see, the handle is still unrestored. And we've just got a little bit of rust here on the sides, and just a little bit on the bottom here, so you can see that it's actually sat on some droplet of water at some point. Yet again, everything that we're seeing here, this rust, it's just surface. I've caught it early enough. Now, that is an important thing. Even if you're a little negligent in your maintenance of your tools, particularly your hand planes, regularly checking your tools is what you need to do, and you'll pick it up even if you have missed it. So you don't want it sitting for weeks, months, years, because then you're going to start getting deeper rust in there, and you're going to have to go through a whole restoration process or some isolated restoration process to fix that. And that's something we definitely don't want to do. Let's get back down here, and I'm going to show you what I do to clean this rust up. It's a fairly quick and easy process, and it does a good job, and it's very inexpensive to do. Now for this process, I'm going back to everyone's favourite 4-knot steel wool. Sifter brand, any steel wool you've got. Even technically you could use the kitchen steel wool that's got the soap in it if you really wanted to. You don't need to be too delicate with this, but obviously you don't want to wreck the finish that you've already got on there and developed through even a restoration. So I'm going to use 4-knot steel wool. Along with that, I'm going to use some alcohol. This is just denatured alcohol. It's 100% industrial strength. The point of that is that you need to use something to help lubricate the steel wool, and you want something that's going to evaporate and not leave moisture on the surface, and that's quite important. So the alcohol is what I'm going to be using here. You could use methylated spirits. Pay attention to what you're using, because a lot of methylated spirits can have up to 10% water in it, so you just want to be very careful. The alcohol that you would use for French polish or shellac is going to do a pretty good job here. So this is just decanted, so we're going to use that today. The first one I'm going to do is just on this one, because this isn't going to take much work at all. So we're just going to wad up pizza steel wool like this. A little bit of alcohol in it like this. And literally I'm just going to rub the surface, covering anywhere where that rust is. Now I had a slight bit here which I didn't notice before, so I'm just going to give that. And it's always a good idea to take them apart and check if there's any other spots where rust has developed. If there's nothing on the bottom side of your blade, it's unlikely that it's snuck in between the blade and the chip breaker. But if there is some present, even take apart your blade assembly and just ensure that there's nothing there, because obviously we don't want any sneaky rust there. And these hand planes, in the very first case where I've got them and they've been really rusty, they've obviously been neglected and put away somewhere, and you can see in any of my restoration videos where you've seen how rusty they are, you can see the kind of damage that rust can do. A little bit of rust. Now there's a little bit in behind here, and that was a little bit of surface rust I couldn't remove when I did my initial restoration, so I'm not too worried about that. But I have a little bit, just a little spot here. It's practically non-existent, but you know, just take a little bit of care when you do this and make sure you actually get all those rust spots. And although this alcohol evaporates, I like to come in with a paper towel or a bit of rag and just help speed that process up. So now I'm going to sit these to the side. We're going to tackle this one here, which has a little bit of extra increased rust just here. Once again, steel wool with alcohol. Now, as it darkens like this, it's going to be harder to see if you've removed the rust, so come back in, wipe it. Rub it some more, move your steel wool around like this. Now, if we look at this, we can see the rust is pretty much gone in this one section I've tackled up here. Once again, tackle that section, wipe it clean. As you can see, it is surface rust and it's coming off so easy that in some cases it doesn't really matter, but it's better to not have to do this, because if something slips through the cracks, it is going to rust further and we don't want that. And once again on this side, and we can see that I didn't notice this until I just rubbed that there. It's shined it slightly further here, which means that this is a little tarnished through here, so just rubbed the whole lot back, which means there was a little more rust occurring on this than I initially thought. Or tarnish in this case. So now we've wiped that back, you can see that this is all looking uniform in colour now, and it looks like we've removed that rust. Just want to make sure that you capture the tops of these if there's any rust. I've got a little bit here, so I'm just hitting the high point. And if you've got a hand plane that's got painting, you're not going to get rust up on the top of them. But some of these, like this was left clear. Once again, do all the checks on these, take them apart, check everything. After you've checked everything, obviously you need to reset that hand plane. I'm actually going to have these left apart because all these bare metal surfaces we're going to coat as best we can. I'm not going to go as far as removing the frog, but the biggest, most exposed surfaces are what we're going to treat to prevent that rust. If your steel wool gets clogged up with rust like this one is, get some more. We want some nice, clean, fresh steel wool so we're not putting rust dust everywhere or water in rust dust. So now we're moving on to the worst affected. You can clearly see how rust affected this lever cap is. So this might take a little more time, but we're going to start with it just sitting here like this, and we're just going to work that rust. Just work it like this. Once again, give it a wipe. And we can see that we're already starting to take that off. Since this wasn't fully restored, there was still a little bit of fine rust here, so I'm not looking to get that. I'm just showing you how to get rid of the worst, because this was the best candidate for it. So you can see I've still got a little bit of pitted rust down in here, but that wasn't the surface rust. That was already there. Since this wasn't a restored hand plane, that was already there. I was aware of that. And just keep working these areas. Now if you have a little bit like I have just here, it's a little more ingrained, you can go to some fine sandpaper if you need to, or if you've got other grits of steel wool, you can go to a heavier grit of steel wool to solve that problem. The process here is we don't want to go too heavy on this. The other thing you could use, which sometimes works, is going to a strop with a bit of honing compound, and that can actually buff that rust off. Especially when you come in with it like this, and you can just move it through. It's a little bit of an easier, more natural process to remove that rust. Now, if you look at this, you can see that that's come up nice and shiny, and there is some more in-grain rust under there, which I'd remove in something like a vapor rust or vinegar if I'm restoring it, but since this one's not restored, that is as far as I'd go with that. And once again, we want to tackle this rust on the side. Now I'm not going to show you on this one removing that rust again. I'm going to go back to the other hand plane, and I want to show you the process I run through when checking the hand planes and then protecting them from rust. So the hand plane I've got back here is the number 5 hand plane, this beautifully restored 1800s hand plane. Now we obviously don't want to have rust built up on this again. First point of call is to clean the hand plane. When we first clean it, what we want to be doing is obviously removing as much dust off the hand plane as possible. Now, I know I'm guilty of making the mistake of not doing that myself, forgetting, running out of time, all that sort of thing, but it's important that you try to remove as much dust off your hand planes after you've used them. The best way to remove the dust, I find, if you've got a compressor, you can blow some air over it, that works well. If not, you can go a little low-tech, use a brush like this Lee Nielsen one, or just a normal dustpan brush like this, and sometimes a little just dry toothbrush or paintbrush works quite well to get in those small areas. This hand plane is not too bad, so just going to do a general brush over these parts down in here. Now, if there are any tight areas, like just down around in the mouth here, if you don't want to take it apart, which you're not going to do every time, is you can just get in here with a toothbrush in behind the back here. Got so all these tight areas, you can get a toothbrush or a small paintbrush in there and remove that rust. When it comes to the chip breaker and lever cap, we want to remove this screw here, and we want to go back to the steel wool with a bit of alcohol. Now, this process here of steel wool and a bit of alcohol is not something I would do all the time. This is something that I do if I've noticed a bit of rust, or if I'm about to do as we're about to do here and put a bit of protectant on to prevent further rusting. So once again, a bit of 4/0 steel wool with some alcohol. We're just going to give it a quick rub over the surface. This also has another process of helping to remove some of that tarnish and actually keep it looking better as well. Just make sure you're being careful of the edges here. You don't want to chip the work that you've already put in to prepare them while doing this. And of course, quick dry on these ones as well. This is going to speed the process up and allow us to get our protectant on faster. Lever cap. The big areas that you can see easily, just run the steel wool over it like that. Now, sometimes if you've got a problem in here, you can actually just get in here with a brush with a little bit of alcohol on it and just brush out behind this spring just here. Now sometimes you might have to lever it out a little bit to do that, but you can also push the lever forward like this, which is pushing that spring open. If we look nice and closely here, we can get in behind that and clean it, because this is a big spot. This is the worst spot on a lever cap where rust can build up, because moisture and dust can get stuck in behind there. So you just want to try and clean that out. The next thing we can do is come in on the outer sole of the hand plane and just give that a quick wipe over with the alcohol. Give it a wipe back. You have to excuse the blue marks that came up just up here. I don't know if you saw that. That was just a little bit of the marker left over from when I flattened the sole of this plane. So now we've removed any rust that's appeared, we've cleaned the whole plane back, and we're ready for our preventative maintenance. I know there's a lot of commercial products out there, and I did see a video on the Wood Whisperer channel where he was using some specific products to protect his cast iron, I believe it was his table saw bench. So these similar processes, because they're metal, they can interlap into things like power tools as well, because at the end of the day, rust prevention is rust prevention. So I will link his video down below in case you're interested, because I thought he did a very good job on that, and he did a series of tests. What I'm using for this is my homemade paste wax. I'll leave the video down below for how to make that. It's just beeswax and linseed oil, and in this case I used raw linseed oil. You can use boiled linseed oil as well. It doesn't really matter, but it's up to you. Now you can use a bit of fine steel wool if you want to apply this. Don't really need to. We don't really need to rough that surface any further. If you've got some surfaces that are a little pitted like this, then maybe it helps to push it in a little bit more, but you don't have to. I just use a bit of shop towel, the paper towel, and just pick up a little bit. You don't want very much here in this case. So I apply this to all the metal surfaces of my hand plane, and I'm really wiping it and turning the cloth over. I want to wipe it almost dry, so there's a very, very thin layer on here. Now the reason I want such a thin layer is that the paste wax itself can pick up dust if we leave too much of it on there, so we don't want that happening. So it's a very thin layer, so we're essentially just got a layer of paste wax that's as thin as it can. And obviously we're going to do what we're normally doing, we'll buff it off the surface afterwards, but you're essentially smoothing the surface, and you don't want to buff it off as much as if you're using it on a finish. You kind of just want to sit it there and then wipe it over, because you want it to actually sit and dry on the surface. I do the metal surface of the frog here without taking it out. So we've wiped that over. Just make sure that your work surface is clear of any dust where you're putting it down. I just had a bit of dust stick to the bottom of my hand plane, which you don't want. After you've dusted your hand planes, just make sure you clean your surface before going on to this next process, just to prevent a reoccurrence of rust. So you can do this in any order, and I then come in and I just do the face of my frog down here like this, working it the best I can. You can remove the frog if you want. I find that a bit of a hassle. If you don't have to remove it, you're going to do it more often because you don't want to have to hassle with realigning the frog each time. And you can also just get it on that screw there as well, like this. You can't really see any of the paste wax sitting there. There is a very thin layer here, which is what we're after. I go ahead and I apply the same to the lever cap. Now, I like to use paste wax. You can strop these tools with a polish, and that will have some sort of protectant against rust as well. Especially on your blade and stuff. The cutting edge doesn't tend to because of that polish, but I prefer the paste wax. I think it does a better job. When it comes to the lever cap here, I don't put any paste wax in behind here because we can't get in there and wipe it off. It's just going to make it more of a catch-all for rust. So just clean that out, and you don't want to get paste wax down in there. So keep the lever cap forward and make it more difficult. And don't really work too heavily in that area. And then of course we've got the blades. And as I said, you could just polish these on a strop or whatever, or do what I'm doing here. Now you want to get in these little areas here on the thread, just so you get that flat edge, and on the edges of your blade. Keep applying a small amount. With these blades, I like to really just wipe them back like this. And obviously in the blade again, you want to get down in this slot just here. You get the idea. We're covering the whole surface. So now what I do is, you want to let that dry. Now, obviously it could take some time, but if you're going to do this, just do all of them all at once, and then you don't have to worry about it. Once every 6 months or once every 12 months, spend a day doing all your tools. Whether that's your hand planes or even bits like on an egg beater drill like this. All these metal parts can rust if not looked after. Even down to your chisels. Now, if you've got Japanese chisels like these ones here, you probably don't have to worry too much about that. They've got the paint on here, or the darkened from the forging. However, if you have Western chisels, like most of us will, these can rust. Although they're heavily polished, they don't tend to rust as much as something like cast iron. And obviously, I believe the chromium content in the metal not only makes the metal stronger, but also helps to prevent it from rusting. Even your hand saws, we can see that this one, which hasn't been restored, has this rust in it, and that can be from hands touching it, which leaves a greasy residue and fingerprints, and that can also attract dust to it, and then that dust holds the moisture and rusts it. I think I've done that to death now. I think you understand how it works. Anything on the surface that can cause dust to attract to it. With your hands and fingers on some metal parts like this, the acids and greases in your skin can react with the metal, and that can also cause it to rust. So just bear in mind, and if you remember, wipe your tool down at the end. If you've been touching it with your hand like this, you can just come in, give it a quick wipe down, and that'll wipe those fingerprints off and prevent any issues. But we also want to do that maintenance on a saws like this. Now, the process is identical with this. You just rub it straight over the surface, like so. Wipe it back, let it dry, give it another wipe over with either some paper towel or a microfiber cloth, and you're good to go. When it comes to more intricate tools like, say, this saw set here, once again, I've had a little bit of rust build up on here, so I'm going to have to spend some time out here doing some cleaning up. So, you know, if you want to see a video of me doing some of these other tools, let me know in the description below if you're interested in that. You want to leave this paste to wax 15-20 minutes. If you come in and it's touch dry to the surface like this is, and because it's such a fine film, I generally find 5-10 minutes is enough, and this is already dry to the touch. So now we'll come back with another cloth. Microfiber cloths work quite well for this. You could even use your horsehair brush if you saw the other video of me finishing that box up. You could do that, but with this I just prefer a cloth. So we obviously just come in and we want to just give it a good buff like that and remove anything that's left behind. And if you find you're picking up dirt like this, you know that's probably dust that was left behind, so regularly turn your cloth and just get into all those nooks, just so, as I mentioned before, you don't have that build up of paste wax sitting there. So now I've got these ready to go. Obviously, you've got to go through the process of reassembling all of this. So if you're not too familiar with reassembling the hand plane, I'll leave those links down below, screwing the blade up. I've got a few of them on the channel, so I'll just leave them down below for you to help if you've put it back together, jumping into this and just doing this. But essentially, as we're doing this, it's a very quick and easy process. Going to put that screw back in here, cross the blade across, swing the chip breaker around, push the chip breaker up to the edge and set it to however the distance is that you want, 1.5 millimeters, and either using a screwdriver or the lever cap, do that up, drop the blade in, and you're going to bring your lever cap back in like this, and going to lock that in place with that little click sound that you heard just there, and then you've got to square the blade up, and that's a whole other video, so I just wanted to show you a quick reassembly here, but those other videos go into more depth, so I do suggest you check them out if you need that help. There you have it, folks. As you can see, it is a fairly straightforward process, and I always try to make these processes as easy as possible and beginner friendly and as quick as possible. Now obviously, if you've got some rust, you're going to have to deal with that first, as we did here. Whether it's worse rust or not so bad, that's the process. And you just want to make sure that you're regularly checking. That is the key. If there's one key takeaway from this video, that is to regularly check your tools to make sure rust doesn't occur and you don't get things as bad as I got with my jointer plane that was up here. Now obviously these processes, as I mentioned before, can work to prevent rust on any metal surface, to be honest. Some metal surfaces are obviously more resistant to rust than others, so you know, maybe you don't have to worry quite so much, or you don't need to do those processes quite as often there. However, with hand planes like this that you're touching regularly with your hands, I would recommend that you try to tackle them maybe every 6 months, and obviously at least once every couple of months, just check on them and make sure that there's no rust developing. That's a quick and easy process, obviously, to just have a quick look over. And if you have the time and you remember, wipe your tools down after you're done. So if you've touched it, do wipe them down, but this protector does help to prevent any of those oils or acids in your skin getting onto the metal and causing it the rust in the first place. So if you like this video and you got some value out of it, please consider liking and subscribing down below. Really does help the channel out. And while you're down there, if you want to give a super thanks for the video, I'd very much appreciate that. If you'd like to support me a little bit further, please consider checking me out on Patreon. And if you'd like some more videos like this great beginner video here on maintenance, I'll leave the link up here to where I did the maintenance on the Veritas honing jig. Very similar process to this. And I'll also leave the beginner playlist here, which is beneficial for any of you new to the channel. Bye for now.